Virginia Giuffre, once a teenage victim trapped in Jeffrey Epstein's web, took on billionaires, a British prince, and a celebrity lawyer, and forced the world to look at the rot among the elites. After being trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell in the early 2000s, Giuffre spent years fighting for justice. She settled with Epstein's estate, helped expose Maxwell, and even sued Prince Andrew, forcing a £12 million settlement that permanently exiled him from public royal life. Let's be clear here, though. A woman with no royal title brought down the Queen's favourite son. Giuffre's lawsuits weren't just about money. They ripped the mask off a system built to protect the rich. And yes, when she later dropped her defamation suit against Alan Dershowitz, I think, admitting she may have misidentified him, skeptics skeptics jumped on it, but despite attacks on her credibility, she remains one of the few who dared to confront powerful abusers directly and won. At this stage, there is still much that is not known about Miss Giuffre's last days or her personal circumstances. But as her family has said, as a young woman, she had the strength to stand up to a toxic mix of power, money, and privilege in the circles surrounding Epstein that sexually exploited so many girls. There will be suspicions, the long shadows of Epstein's poisonous misuse of wealth and influence has indirectly claimed another victim. Bottom line, though, she has made the untouchable touchable and maybe, just maybe, reminded us that no gilded title or billion-dollar fortune should place anyone above accountability. I do also just want to preface before I bring Cog in that there was a tweet that maybe some of you have seen that she wrote maybe 6 years ago or a few years ago. And I don't have the graphic, but I'll read it out to you. And she had said that I'm making it publicly known that no way, shape or form am I suicidal. I've made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me, in the sake of my family, do not let this go away and help me to protect them. Too many evil people want to see me quieted. So I'll bring Cog in before I start analysing this a little bit further. But Cog, is real justice even possible under a system where financial settlements replace criminal accountability? And what would a truly just outcome for survivors like Giuffre look like?
Well, I don't know what justice for somebody like Giuffre would look like exactly, but I can speak to like the wider point, which is the way that our justice system has slowly got more profit oriented. And basically, a justice system that works for everybody shouldn't be one that you can just pay your way out of. We've seen in the last few years that legal aid has been cut to the bone, and legal aid was the means by which the poor were able to access justice in the UK. At least I again can't speak for the rest of the world, so I have to speak in wide but limited terms. And one of the things that legal aid did, well-funded legal aid, was it meant that lawyers were able to allocate time to each case, and therefore more care was being taken in each case. And as more care is being taken in each case, you have a greater chance of achieving justice. An interesting thing about our legal system is that corporate lawyers get paid in the millions, and criminal lawyers get paid in the tens of thousands. But of course, to most of us, criminal law is the one we care about, right? If you get mugged down the street, you care about that a lot more than you care about, the financial settlements between Google and Amazon. But there is a very clear distinction in terms of which one pays better for lawyers and which ones lawyers have to go into in order to earn enough to live. There is a trope about lawyers being very rich, and a lot of them are very well paid, but a lot of those who choose to do the work that really matters, criminal law, family law, they are very much underpaid. Very much like underpaid, having to pay court fees out of their own pockets. There's a lot going on there. When it comes to what our system should look like specifically, there was an interesting video which I saw that was somebody who was telling a story about a prankster who'd been to the Philippines. It was an American prankster, and the American prankster had gone. They'd been harassing people. They'd be one of these kind of edgy pranksters, harassing people in the street. And the Filipino justice system had got hold of them and the Americans were like, okay, so we've been arrested now, but how much do we have to pay to get out of this? And of course, the Filipino courts were like, pay to get out of this?
Mm.
I'm sorry, you think you're paying to get out of this? You're not paying to get out of this. Once you're in the court system, that's it. You're looking at a 24-year sentence. No, and there's no such thing as paying for bail here. And although I think 24 years for a harassment prank is incredibly harsh, and I don't support that as a system, it does show, I think, how normalized it's become in the West to expect cash for justice.
Mm.
But of course, this kind of drifts away from the wider picture of Giuffre and Prince Andrew, which I feel like you might want to comment on.
Yeah, of course I do, because I think we have to criticize the monarchy, but also, I mean, given her death was quite sudden, out of the blue, I think it took us all by surprise. I would expect for there to be some sort of comment, but maybe that's me being too optimistic. It, Prince Andrew has been silenced in a lot of ways because of what's happened, and you sometimes see his small face in the background of something to do with the monarchy. But I do think that there is a protection that comes with being within certain institutions. And it does kind of come into a broader picture. Like if we think about Britain, for example, we know for a fact that institutional abuses happen within certain systems. If we look at the Church of England, for example, there are lots of victims who have been silenced as a result of the abuses that they've faced. And then you also had the church say we were going to deny having an independent safeguarding review. So I think there is a conversation to be had about how institutions protect those in power and how accountability isn't actually, they're not held to account at all. So look, everyone knows what I'm like. I don't think we should have a monarchy. I think I'm going to be quite contentious today because I was even having a conversation with Cog and Curtis earlier, and I was like, I think I've got a tinfoil hat. I don't think that she committed suicide, but I know that we have to be very careful. She's unfortunately passed away, and I think that that's what needs to be focused on. I think what we can have conversations about is the fact that she was a victim, and went to court about these things, being a survivor of abuse. I kind of want to, go ahead, Cog.
I'll be honest. I originally, like, my first instinct, and you'll remember when the news broke in our chat on Turn Left, I originally just I posted it in the chat, and I was like, I really want to, I really want to say this is a coincidence, but I'm just like, this is too much coincidence.
Sensible.
But coincidence, I think, is a really low bar for evidence, and I think there are a couple of things to bear in mind. I think there's a couple of things that make me think, okay, this, although it's sus as fuck, like absolutely so suspicious, I do think that it probably was legitimately a case of suicide. Curtis actually put it very well, regardless of whether she was suicidal or not. This is what Curtis said originally in the chat. Said that she's still a victim of Prince Andrew, exactly. Because we know from there was a meta study done for the University of Manchester by Maria Pangiotti, which it was a meta study of 68 studies that looked at suicidality in sexual abuse victims, and found that sexual abuse victims are 3 times more likely than general members of the public to attempt suicide in their lifetime. They are just considerably more likely. And I think the other thing to bear in mind, the framing of this, is her family don't think that there's anything particularly suspicious about this. The police don't regard it as anything, and this is local police. This isn't the sort of like place where like Prince Andrew would have the sort of influence. There's also the fact that I don't think that the motives quite line up. Prince Andrew had already settled. It would be a bit of a disaster for him in terms of PR to pull this all back into the limelight. And that he, the idea of like him pulling all this back into the limelight to assassinate somebody who he's already settled with, it would just, it's a bit much of a stretch for me in terms of the motive, but maybe people
Yeah.
in the chat will disagree.
And I think the fundamental fact here is that it's a tragic death, and I think what needs to be focused on is the fact that she was a victim and survivor of atrocious things. And there is bravery, I think, in putting yourself in the limelight and actually bringing to light these issues. And you mentioned something really interesting, that meta study. We know for a fact that when victims do come forward, they are essentially shamed, and then not the fear of not being believed. And we know for a fact that these systems, these court systems that we exist within, are not trauma informed enough. Just to pivot slightly, we know that some names have kind of stayed in the shadows, because we've got Peter Mandelson, Labour grandee, now UK ambassador to the US, and a man with deep ties to Epstein. In a Financial Times interview early February 2025, when questioned about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson responded with, "I regret ever meeting him or being introduced to him by his partner, Maxwell. I regret even more the hurt he caused to many young women. I'm not going to go into this. It's a Financial Times obsession. Frankly, you can all F off." Okay. Now, F off where, Peter? You were being questioned and you cowered. When pressed about this, he's literally telling reporters to F off. Cog, why do some powerful figures face consequences whilst others equally connected kind of walk away untouched?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the particular ins and outs of who you know and how high profile the victims of that person become, and that is one of the things about Virginia Giuffre in particular, is that she is a complex character. I think there is a danger of, and this isn't necessarily connected to Peter Mandelson. Apologies. Talk about answering the question I wish I'd been asked, but I do think there is a danger of whitewashing Virginia Giuffre, who was involved in like a years-long court battle with her ex-partner, according to sort of the statements given out by her family. Although she was a very brave advocate, she was also like quite unstable. It's very clear that her like her the things that had happened to her, like her I want to say her trauma, but I don't know if that's the right term, had like clearly affected her health. And I I think there's a danger of whitewashing victims and trying to create the perfect victim out of Giuffre, and we need to allow space for victims to not be perfect, and for us to still portray them as victims, as as people deserving of the most sympathy, and the most support. Um, and I
Mm.
think, yeah, perhaps uh, post court support, post conclusion support might have been one of the things that might have helped. With regards
Mm.
to Peter Mandelson, I mean, he's a slimy figure all round.
Support independent media, support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.